responsible for growing that division through about 2005. In about 2005, he began to focus on thought leadership pieces for the bank. If you look at the bank's website, if you see the annual report they do, you can, and his blog, he is a very well respected and well regarded pundit and industry analyst, and he has some very important things to say to us today. In fact, Rob has told me a couple of times that after 12 or 15 years of writing this report, this may be the most important of the bank's analyst reports of the wine industry that he's ever done. So with that, take it away, Rob.
Thank you. And thank you to Mechanics Bank for sponsoring this event, Dan. I appreciate it. I understand Mechanics Bank is the best bank in the world.
That is true.
When I was driving over here, I was wondering how many people would actually show up. I remember early in my career, over in Napa, we had Rutherford Hill Winery, and Jeff Yeager, Yeager family was the owner, and we had just banked. We just put them on the books, and we were so young in the business, and we had one of these kind of weather things, happening, and Highway 29 was closed, Silverado Trail was closed, people were locked into places, and the executives in the bank, they're coming up to me and they say, well, what's happening with our new client? I don't know. And so I made a phone call to Jeff, and I said, Jeff, what's going on? And he said, well, I got good news and bad news. Bankers don't like that. we just rather have good news, honestly. But he said, got good news and bad news. He says, and I said, all right, well, give me the bad news first. And he says, well, everything that was down by the river, the flood took out the trellising. And I said, oh, that's a bummer. I said, what's that going to cost you? And he says, well, the vines will come back up. But he says, the water doesn't hurt the vines. And I said, well, that's good to know. And I said, well, what is the good news? And he says, well, the other bad news is that the flood took away our hot tub, the washed down. And I said, okay, well, what's the good news? And he said, well, the good news is our neighbor's hot tub floated onto our property. It's better. True story. So, important things. And Dan's right. This report that I put out this last year, in my opinion, is the most important report that I've ever done, because the industry is clearly at a tipping point. And because the industry is such a good news industry, we like to think everything is fine. If you walk to your next door neighbor and you say, how's business? Guess what they're going to say? Great. It's always great. So, we're kind of a good news industry, and if you want the good news and the bad news, I'll give you the good news first. The good news is that the U.S. wine industry had record sales last year. Still, we're at records, all-time highs. Now, we could just stop right there if you want, except if we don't talk about the trends that are up ahead of us, this is also a very long-term industry. We have to get out ahead of trends, because as you guys are well aware, it takes 5 years before you get a fully mature yield, and then you start to vinify grapes, and the sales process now is becoming more and more complex. So we have to get way out ahead of change. I'm thinking about changing my middle name to Doom and Gloom McMillan, just because of some of the things that I've been saying. But when you see the presentation, consider that things are fine, and what I'm talking about is where we're headed. And I would rather talk about where we're headed because it gives us opportunity to evolve. But we have to start with a common and shared view of what's happening in the industry. And I think the good news is that the report and the stuff that I put out so far this year is sinking in, and it seems to be reiterated throughout the business. So start here. I'm going to start with a little bit of a historic view. You guys can see, I hope. I'm kind of in a strange spot. Normally I walk around on stage, but I forgot my switcher. Well, that's at my speech yesterday. So this is a historic view of ethanol consumption. It looks very similar to a lot of other slides you'll see, but this right here is where you can see the tipping point on beer. So you can see beer starts to trend down. Back in that era, the beer industry decided what they were really going to do is just consolidate to about 3 companies, and they were going to make crappy beer. That's a financial term. And not surprisingly, the consumers didn't like it. I didn't like it. But when I was a very young kid, it didn't matter because I could get 50-cent Lucky Lagers. Remember those with the little, they had the little screw twist-off caps and they had the puzzles inside? Yeah, those are great. So that was not a good thing for beer because it's never recovered from that. In the wine industry, that green line, that shows you what happened when we had neo-prohibition that came. It was an accumulation of a bunch of different people that got together from Cindy Lighter, I think was her name, or Candy Lighter, one of the two. The whole idea was to lower the alcohol beverage, blood alcohol levels, so that people would stop getting in wrecks and killing people. And so that was a part of it. There was a religious component of this as well. There's an anti-alcohol funded, very, very large funded thing worldwide now. And then the U.S. government was also in the middle of it, trying to make policy. So we decided at that point that wine drinking in this case was not good for you. And so you can see really what happened at that period of time. Until we get to about 1994. And 1994 was the period of time where the median millennial, the median boomer, hit 35. 35 to 55 historically has been the area where you normally get the highest spending pattern. So we saw a very long period of time where effectively the wine industry has had a kind of a field of dreams. And then if you look down the bottom of that red line, the red line is craft spirits. Right around that period of time, in the early 2000s, the craft and spirits industry decided to follow what was happening in the wine business and said, hey, premiumization is a real thing. And they started making premium spirits as well. And you can kind of see what's happened with the spirits industry since then. Beer has never recovered. And you can see today it's still in a real big mess because they can't advertise their way out of their problem. They're just not making the kind of product that people want. So that's the issue that they're really facing. For wine, we end up with this little flattening section that I've talked about for the last few years. First year, when I started to notice that one data point does not make a trend, you really can't talk about that. 2 data points, maybe. But now we're talking about 3, 4, or 5 data points that are pointing out this trend. This year, this is kind of the process that I went through when I was writing the report this year. I start from the beginning, I go through all of the data, I try to figure out what's going on. And this year, I was really surprised by what I found. It's not normally the case. This year I was. And so we start off by looking at off-premise sales. And this is total dollars, which you can see it's flattening toward the edge. Very consistent with that last slide. And then I saw what was happening with volume. And that really shocked me because I hadn't seen total volume for off-premise turn negative since 1993 was the last time. So I actually called Nielsen. I said, is this right? And the analyst at Nielsen said, well, I don't know. Let me get back to you. He called me back and said, yeah, that's right. Nobody had noticed it for some reason. And there you have it. So that was weird, but that's not enough for me to really say, so there's something wrong. So you just got to keep looking because the data and the information that's out there in the wine business, we're all a private industry. And so it's really hard to find good data and information. So I just keep digging. And so here's one of the issues. Obviously, I think we're all aware of premiumization and off-premise growth in wine below $9 was trending down. So that's part of the issue, and that's obvious. The one that I talked about year before last now in the report was I started to notice that the stuff above $9 was also starting to decrease in sales growth. So that's not to say that the sales are negative, it's to say that the growth rate was declining. And you can still see that in this most recent slide the same thing holds true. The growth rate in premium wine is still declining. So that's one more data point that I'm not really thrilled about. But I also recognize that that's Nielsen data. Nielsen data doesn't include things like Costco and Aldi and Lidl, Trader Joe's. So it's missing several of those data points. And I actually have information that suggests those, what I would call premium value suppliers, are actually doing pretty well. Their growth rate's somewhere north of 10%. So they're actually doing pretty well. But when I went and I looked and I got warehouse trends, I see the same thing. So the shipment trends in warehouse are still not doing good. Still recognizing bias in this data. One of the things that it doesn't include is, so if you had something like Naomi that gets sold to Constellation, that gets pulled out of the warehouse trend and goes into Constellation's warehouse. So every single piece of data, including my own, have a bias, and you just have to understand it when you're looking at it. But still, I've got data point after data point after data point that are lining up. And here's another one that I found from Gomberg. It's the first time that I can recall, and I'm sure it has happened before, but I can't recall when. E&J Gallo shows negative growth. That was shocking to me. And actually the big 7 negative growth. Again, consistent with that first slide, but from a totally different data source. The data are continuing to be consistent. And then we have, it's looking really like we've been collecting financial statements for a very long time, and created a database of financial, it's reviewed, audited statements from our customers, and we're able to put those together and do benchmarking for our clients. This is just a slide of sales since 2010, and you can see again the trend for fine wine companies. It's positive. The last 2 periods, by the way, are 9-month periods just to compare, so it's even slightly up compared to last year's 9-month period, if you want to look at it that way. So there's good news, right? but the trend is not. It's not the one you want to see. You'd rather see, better growth. And then here's the one that shocked me. This is where I was going. You got to be kidding! I didn't expect this. So we send out a survey every year. We do 2 surveys a year. By the way, the direct-to-consumer survey will go out this next week. But we send out one in October every year that is aimed at trying to get statuses of things that are happening in the business. And so this is the product of 5 years of that survey. 2, 3, 4, 5 years of that survey. Last year in October, I think we were all busy. And or a year before now, in October, we were all busy putting on dust masks and trying to survive. And so it really wasn't worth sending that survey out. So I was going blind on my own research on the year before report now. So I didn't have that. And last year when I produced this slide, I had to just put an estimate. So I just estimated that the millennial consumption pattern was higher. So really, I hadn't looked at this in 2 years, and what I saw when I finally did look at it was Gen X was doing what I would expect. They're in their 39 to 54, those are their top spending years. Even though a small cohort, they're doing well. They're buying as you would expect. My mom's generation, she never likes me talking about this, that they're declining. She doesn't like me saying anything like that. Declining, going away, whatever. And then, boomers, I was kind of surprised. I expected to see the boomers start to trend off. The boomers who have 75% of disposable income, 50% of net wealth in the United States, they're still hanging in there as consumers. So that again is good news. But that's the one, the millennials, that's the one that surprised me, because today we have boomers with all of that wealth that have been the buyers that did drive that big consumption pattern for 25 years almost. In 4 years now, the median boomer hits retirement age of 66. So I guarantee you that that's a part of the trend that we're seeing, is that the older consumer, there's fewer, there's natural mortality, there are health issues that start to come up, slows your drinking. You start to live on a fixed income, you look ahead of that living on a fixed income, you change your spending patterns. And in some cases, the ones that are doing, they're fine wine consumers, I hear this one a lot, is that I'm just drinking my cellar, which, that's for a lot of people, that was kind of the plan all along. They're going to get their cellar up, cellar things for 20 years and then drink it in retirement. So we know that the boomers are going to start to fade off. I hate to use that word, but at some point they probably will. And then here I got millennials. So I wanted to double check that. Is that really true? So here's another source of data that's from an entirely different resource. This is from Customer Vineyard. They're a big data company. And what this shows is consuming cohorts, consuming by like 3-year, each of these are like 3-year bands. And so you can see when you add in the millennials, it's 11% of share. The last slide I had it at 17. So this data comes from about 140,000 transactions that have been double checked with big data, using big data to agglomerate that stuff together. And it's probably, well, it's better than the survey data that I have, but it's actually pretty consistent. Wine.com actually came out with some interesting research just this last week too. The narrative in the press is a little askew, but they came out with almost the exact same thing as well, is that the millennial in their consumption pattern, even though they're strong in terms of the number of consumers, about a third of the consumer base of their brands, they're only spending 26% of share, but they're counting all young people from 21 to 41. So they have an extra 5 years in the way they're figuring it. And if you take that, 23%, and you back out that 5-year period, the data are just about identical to what we're finding, and a little bit more than what Customer Vineyards find. But it's the same information. It's the young consumers not really engaging as we'd hope. And again, here is where the top boomer or the top consumers are right now. It's the 55 to 65. So it's skewing old. Now, is that because that's the way it should be, or is that because that's what's happened? Is that's what's evolved? And it's what has evolved. This is a slide of U.S. population by age. Each of these lines are single years. And what's interesting in this is I just put a couple of lines here. 66, that's the normal retirement age. And then over here I put 35. By 35, you ought to start to see people engage. You ought to start seeing people engaging in wine. You would think that they would move from beer and spirits over into wine. And so if you look at both of the shapes of those curves, what that's saying is over the next 5 years, we're going to have an accelerating number of boomers hitting retirement and an accelerating number of younger consumers hitting that 35 age bracket. So what we're just being able to barely see right now is going to accelerate, and it's going to make our heads spin over the next 5 years. This will become more and more apparent over the next 5 years. So now this is where we have to get. So why? It's fine to point something out, but why? You got to know. So here's a few things we'll go through. One, I call the young consumer a frugal hedonist because they don't really have the wealth, but they have the taste. They have the knowledge. They have the ability to go find things, but they don't really have the money. So they watch what they spend. They only buy things that they like, but there's this indulgence gap that we'll go through. Cumulative negative health messaging is out there. We'll show you some of that. Cannabis is a bit of an issue, small one today. And then momentum with craft spirits and beer is an issue that I'll talk about. And then I think the thing we're probably really lax on is we're just missing the mark on the way that we are marketing right now. So I'm going to start with this chart here. So this is consumption preference for alcohol. So as we got on the left side is beer, the orange bar is liquor, and the gray bar is wine. And and the little yellow bar is cannabis. And so what I've done is I've taken a few different data sources and put them together. Regular consumers of alcohol are right between, depending on the data you look, between 56 and 60% of the U.S. population, adult population. Regular consumers of cannabis, from the data that I've seen, and by the way, it's really hard to find good data on cannabis. You know, when you do survey data, think about what happens with surveys. So somebody walks out of a legal, what do you call the cannabis places you buy? Dispensary, yeah. You walk out of a dispensary and somebody's got a notepad and they say, did you buy marijuana? And me, you know, that's what you know, I don't know. He said, yes, but I have a friend who's sick, I bought it for them. You know, he said, you don't get good information. The information that I got actually comes from scan terminals and cash registers, so it's a really good source of data. And what it shows is, not surprisingly, the description of a cannabis consumer today is somebody that's male, 26 years old, and so it skews to a younger consumer. And so that when you look at those yellow bars, you can see how they trend down over time. That's the current state of cannabis consumption. But they represent only about 13% of the adult population. It's about 16% in Canada from the data that I see there. So, you know, it's a big difference. The question about substitution now comes into play. So if in fact cannabis is a substitute for wine, if it's taking away share, which is the narrative that a lot of people want to throw out there, oh, look at things aren't good, it must be cannabis. If that's true, then that 13%, they all have to drink wine. And pretty much all of that 13% has to stop drinking wine in order for that really to be a substitute. It's a small number of consumers impacting a large number of consumers. It's not to say that there is no possibility of substitution. The way I look at it is that there is, it's largely a different social purpose. Today you don't walk into a restaurant and pair your Sansevilian with salmon, you know, but you do with wine. It's more than likely you're going to come home from work and get high. And the data support that, by the way. It's not, that's not a made-up fact. And when I look at this other information, they show that it's not only younger people, but it's less affluent. It's under 75,000 in household income that are the more likely consumers of cannabis. So our consumer, the wine consumer, typically is college graduate. Cannabis consumer is not. And the wine consumer is typically older. Cannabis consumer is not. So less of a substitution. Why should we worry about it? Well, when a wine company like Constellation puts $4 billion to buy canopy growth, that, you ought to look at that. But even more so to me is marketing matters. So when we have Francis Ford Coppola that's going to do a lifestyle brand of weed, he's got a grower, I think he's in Mendocino, that is going to grow this for him, and he's going to come out and support the growth of this brand. I start to worry about that, and what happens if we start now having hip-hop artists come in, which makes total sense to me why they would want to do that, but hip-hop artists a little more edgy, that would be the kind of thing you would expect them to gravitate to. So if those kind of things happen, the promotion of cannabis could in fact become a greater problem over time. For now, I don't see it as much of a problem, but it's something I think we need to be aware of. It's a possibility. So the second thing that I look at when we're talking about why are the millennials not engaging is just money. So this is kind of a weird little chart, but what it shows is boomers on the one side. And in the middle we have the Gen X consumers, and on the far side we have the millennial cohort. And the problem when we had the Great Recession is that we had boomers and Gen X who had all of the assets. They had the houses, they had all the stocks as well. And so all of the central banks in the world, they started just throwing money at the problem, just going to funnel money at them. Why do they want to do that? They want to reflate assets. And so, in fact, that's what happened, is that all of the assets of the boomers and Gen X were reflated. But what did the millennials have? They had student debt. As a matter of fact, if you read the report at all, you'll find I did a little bit of research and discovered that when that crash happened, my son was just out of college and he didn't find a job. He went back. He didn't have student debt, thankfully, but he decided to go back and be a bartender for a while, which was not uncommon. But a lot of people, when you have student debt, when you graduate, it's due. It starts to become due, unless you go back to school. And if you go back to school and get your master's degree or another degree, then you can defer that again. And sure enough, you'll see in the report, I didn't present the slide here, but in the report you'll see a lot, this big old bulge of additional students that went back to school during the Great Recession. In large part, that is to defer that debt that's due. But guess what? It's also taking on more debt, right? So it kind of kicks the can down the road. And so we end up with this, what I'm calling an indulgence gap, where the younger consumer is pushed out in a way that the consumers before them operated. Part of it's social too, right? So the younger consumer doesn't get married at the same time. They don't have as many children. They don't have children until later. They buy houses later. So a lot of things are deferred, and all of those things are the kind of activities that actually spur consumption and spur growth. For now, though, that young consumer is today just getting into the workplace. The edge of that consumer is 38 years old. And so now they're at that point where they're starting to figure out, okay, they're buying some houses, they're getting into mainstream consumerism at this point, but they've got this other debt that they're going to have to deal with. The amount of money that they make is nowhere near what prior generations have had to deal with. And they're still going to have to get through a period where they're going to have to deal with diapers over luxuries, right? Wants versus needs. So there's this indulgence gap that has to kind of sort itself out for a period of time. And so it's not just us, but the luxury good manufacturers in the U.S., they're having to deal with the exact same thing. So you can find a lot of information now of economists that are now starting to look at this a little bit more. But the luxury goods industry, and I'll show you a slide on that in a minute, are dealing with that. Cumulative negative health messaging. So this was the beginning of Prohibition years ago. This is actually a slide from 1913. And, this is the temperance movement. A bunch of women got together and used every means possible to figure out a way to cure the ills that liquor caused. And so this is an iconic slide from that period of time. In 1980, we had the same kind of stuff happen. We had, I mentioned, we had Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We had the feds that were pressuring the states to lower the blood out. We were at 0.14, we dropped to 0.1, and then later to 0.08 to where we are today. In 88, we had what they call the Anti-Drug Abuse Act that happened. I don't think anybody really remembers that, but that's how we got the labels in the back of wine bottles. It says Surgeon General, blah, 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 blah. And anybody that was around that time, it was a fight. Because the stuff that the anti-alc lobby wanted on that thing, it was like buying a package of cigarettes. It causes cancer, and it's going to kill you, and so the message that we actually got on the back was probably about as good as we could have hoped. But the interesting part is the Alcohol Beverage Labeling Act was part of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988. Why is that? Because back then, alcohol and wine even were considered gateway drugs for marijuana and cocaine and heroin. That was the message that was being foisted upon us. It's a gateway drug. 1991, the message started to change a little bit. French paradox. I'm sure people are all aware of that in the room. So Serge Renown came out and on the 60 Minutes broadcast and said, hey, there's this weird thing. All the French people drink red wine, and they don't have the same kind of coronary heart disease issues. But right after that, in 1994, I showed you in that first slide, and this coincides again with the boomer hitting 35, the median boomer hitting 35, wine consumption turned positive. So those were, that's where we started getting a little bit of a mixed message and started pushing back. In 98, though, we did lower the blood alcohol to 0.08. 99, wine consumption was deemed healthy, and this guy by the name of Arthur Klatsky, he's the guy that spent the most time, about 30 years, in really good research, proving that people that don't drink end up with less healthy outcomes than people that drink moderately. And then when people abuse alcohol, then you have all sorts of other problems that come up. But it's this J-shaped curve where people that don't drink actually have worse health outcomes than people that drink moderately. And so moderate wine consumption became the message was it's part of a healthy diet. It actually became part of the Mediterranean diet later. So all very positive things. But right after that, the anti-alcohol lobby, they never went away. They continued to try to poke holes in it and just cast doubt as much as anything else. In 2009, I mentioned the Mediterranean diet. 2010, World Health Organization came out with a resolution endorsing a global strategy to reduce the consumption of alcohol. And that's still in the news today. So bringing us back to the current, we as an industry took our eyes off of the anti-health message and the anti-alcohol movement. In 2018, there are calls for the lowering of blood alcohol to 0.05, and Utah has already gone with that. And you say, big deal, it's Utah. But Texas is taking that up. Oregon is taking that up. And I heard this morning that California just introduced a bill in the state to do the same thing for California. So on one hand, I say, okay, well, anti-drunk driving has got a point. We need to cooperate with that. On the other hand, the science that is behind it is more of a push than anything else. It's not really proving that it lowers drunk driving. It's just we're back to that same sort of a thing with neo-prohibitionism in our lap. Europe is even more restrictive. They have a higher per capita consumption over the last 20 years. And by the way, they've lost something. I saw the slide up in Oregon. I was there 2 weeks ago, and they have taken out something like a third of their acreage because their average per capita consumption continues to decline. But in Europe in 2018, the French health minister said that wine is bad for you, if you can imagine that. You might as well say cheese is bad for you and then just close up shop. The UK's chief medical officer said there's no safe level of drinking. And so that's the pressure that we feel over there. And it does resonate across the pond. 2018, we had a Newsweek headline, alcohol is killing more people per year than the opioid crisis. Also, the Lancet, which is a pretty good medical journal, they came out with a thing that said alcohol is associated with 2.8 million deaths each year worldwide. And the data, if you ever look at that, it's totally specious in the way they do the research. It's really a scare thing, but that's what we're dealing with. And then, to the end point, the dietary guidelines that before were added back and said moderate wine consumption is good for you, those were just revoked in November of last year. And when asked why, one of the folks in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said, well, we have doubts about that statement. That was it. So the cumulative negative health message, I think I already did this one, I didn't delete that. So the cumulative negative health message is continuing now to weigh on consumers. And so, how do I know that? It goes into all the data that I've seen, but then one of my colleagues, Danny Brager from Nielsen, worked with Harris Poll after he and I were consulting about the things that I was coming up with, and they actually did some work together in January of this year. And what they came up with is, in a survey, they asked, what are you trying to do with your alcohol consumption? And 2/3 of the consumers under 34 said that they had a strong or moderate effort to reduce the consumption of alcohol. Those are current consumers, current young consumers. And so they are trying to reduce their alcohol consumption. Why are they trying to reduce their alcohol consumption? It's not surprising, it's health. The young consumer is by far more healthy in the way that they make choices than my generation. For my generation, it was, if it's not bad for you, it's good. And so we got Twinkies, Ho-Hos, and diabetes, right? that's the way we thought. But the young population, they want it sustainable, organic, local, green. They only want to put things in themselves that are healthy for them. So not surprising that the younger consumers are cutting back, wanting to cut back because of that healthy lifestyle. So again, thinking back to what I'm talking about, we're talking about the young consumer not engaging. And it comes down to part of its wealth, part of its cumulative and negative information on health, so wealth and health. And part of it ends up being, another thing was just the fact that they are already into both spirits and beer. Now you remember in that first slide I talked about the mistake that beer made, that they just got down to 3 companies and they made craft beer, not crap. And nobody liked it. It wasn't until 1986 that the government actually passed what they called the Craft Beer Act that allowed at-home brewmaking. Before that, it was illegal. And so 86, they came out and they said, okay, you can start doing this, because nobody really liked the beer. In my generation, we would drink Lucky Lager with the little screw caps because it was 50 cents a bottle. And, that was the benefit of scale. These big companies just trying to blow scale. And the other thing that they would do is they thought they had enough money, they would just advertise their way out of the problem and create demand by advertising shitty beer. Oops, sorry, I speak recorded. It's a financial term. So they thought they would just market their way out of it. And so you guys will remember that were around, light beer is less filling. Tastes great, right? Remember that one? Anybody that was around, you would see the commercials for Low and Brown. Here's 2 good friends tonight. Who's kind of special? Beer will pour. So, it's a Low and Brown commercial. And if we really wanted to impress a girl, we would buy St. Polly's Girl because it was the most expensive 6-pack you could buy. And it was crap too. But that's what we have. Today is a different thing. So when you go back and you look at the way that the wine industry just took off in that consumption pattern for the last 25 years, why was that? Okay, it was partly because of wealth. It was partly because of a positive health message from the French Paradox, Arthur Kingsley, Mediterranean diet. So it's partly that, and it was partly because there was no good beer to drink. We didn't want to drink beer, and spirits hadn't come around to understand really that we were looking for something better. So we all went to wine. That's what's driven current consumption. If you look at this slide, though, this is what we end up with today. The consumer today is a total consumer. On the right side, you can see if people that identify as only a wine consumer now, in terms of their spending, it's 5% of beverage consumers. So when we're out there talking to a wine consumer, we're actually talking to a beer consumer, craft beer consumer more than likely. We're talking to a craft spirits consumer. And we can't lose sight of the fact that our competition isn't just wine. It isn't just world wine. It's actually other beverages. And it's things now that even go beyond that. It's energy drinks. It goes on and on and on in terms of the kind of beverages that are really skewing positive today. One of them is spiked seltzers. Anybody heard of that, spiked seltzer? I didn't know that existed until middle of this last year. Well, it turns out it's only been around for about a year and a half. It's already a $1.5 billion category. So what is spiked seltzer? It's you guys, I'm sure, have all had the water that is carbonated and it's got essence in it, right? Just got a flavor with zero calories. That's sold. The message on that is healthy. Why is it healthy? There's no calories, and very clean ingredients. It's got natural ingredients, whatever the hell that means, and bubbling water. So there's nothing to it. It's got to be good for you, right? And so what they do is they put industrial alcohol in that, ethanol, and that's what it is. It's lower alcohol, like 5%. Tastes like crap. I haven't found a good one yet. I keep trying to find one just to say that I understand it, but the same thing's happening with kombucha. You can find spiked kombucha, you can find spiked green tea. So this is our competition now. It's far more than just the wine business. And we have to be aware, why should we? Okay, now think back to that young consumer and their preferences to today's spirits and craft beer. So you can go out and buy a 750 ml bottle of Maker's Mark, and there are 25 1-ounce servings in that bottle. And by the way, that bottle doesn't depreciate over a few month period. It's not going to oxidize. So you can just have it there. You can have it, glass every night. Or you can go buy for $28 the Sonoma County Zinfandel of decent quality, not great quality, and you get 5 servings, and you got to drink it that night. The young consumer notices that. They look at it and they say, okay, 25 servings, 5 servings. And by the way, that shows up in the bartenders too. The bartenders, when you were talking about buy the glass programs, they're dealing with those same margins. Our price that we try to sell at is not a great value when you're comparing yourself to craft spirits. So it shouldn't be a real surprise to us that craft spirits are kind of eating our lunch when it comes to the way we're marketing. So one other thing, and then I'm going to go on to a bunch of marketing kind of ideas and thoughts. Tasting room and club visitation has been off now in Napa and Sonoma County for the last several years. So you can see here's Napa County's down, here's Sonoma County's down. Oregon, not so much. Oregon's up. Big reason Oregon's up, people don't talk about it. They think it's because it's new, it's engaged. But when you look at Oregon and you get through and look at exactly the age of people that are in Oregon, it's not young people. They have the exact same demographics as we do in Napa and Sonoma that are in the wine clubs. It really has more to do with the fact that the Oregon market is supported a lot more from Portland, and Portland's gone through massive growth in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So that's really what we're seeing there is the impact of an economy on the Oregon wine business. Sonoma County, Napa County, a different thing. Napa County, one of the problems, I believe, the average reserve tasting in Napa County is $65. And that's for one customer. If you have 4 customers that come in, and that's typically the younger consumers traveling bigger numbers. The older consumers oftentimes will travel in 2s or 4s. The younger consumers 4s or more. Just so I can do the math, because I don't do math that well, as Dan will tell you. Let's just say it's 60, because I can go 6 times 4 people, $240. Right? So if it's 60, it's $240, $250 for that group. Do you think a young consumer is going to pay that? They're not. It's not making any sense. And so we're going to continue to charge this kind of prices. And it doesn't matter if you look at Sonoma County too. It's not as high as Napa, but the prices are high. And so we're seeing these impacts in the tasting room because of that. So now I'm going to get into marketing. My big thing is marketing is just off point. In the next decade, for sure in the next decade, 5 years ideally, we clearly need to keep boomers, but we have to engage millennials. So it's not as simple when you read chat rooms and things like that. You hear people saying, "Oh, you guys just need to stop talking about long days and cool nights. You just got to stop talking." No, you can't do that, because that's what the older customer wants to hear. They want to hear the spiel. They want to walk into the tasting room. They want this experience. That's their experience. But you've got to find that new experience for a younger consumer. We've got to keep DTC, direct-to-consumer, whether it is tasting room or club. We've got to keep those, but we've got to find a new marketing approach to growth. We've got to evolve the narrative. the narrative can't be long days, cool night only. The new consumer is into fun, healthy, sustainable, socially conscious, and active. That's not what we do in our tasting rooms. That's not what we do in a tasting experience right now. And so that's the part we're going to have to evolve. And so here's an example that I like to use right now. So think about the mixologist. Everybody knows a mixologist, right? You walk into the bar, and they used to be called bartenders. Now they're mixologists, and they're there to dazzle and amaze us, right? It's entertainment. It's an experience. So consumers walk in, they get fire, they get bubbling stuff out of this, and guess what else they're doing when they're selling this, right? When you think about a young consumer that is into the health messaging, you walk in and this guy's going to have a row of mint and different herbs and whatnot in front of him, growing. Oftentimes, he'll be pinching off little things and talking about the healthy and natural ingredients that go into the drink, into the cocktail. And so they're selling health. When was the last time you heard anybody in the wine industry selling health? We're not doing it. So we're missing the consumer. But here's just some ideas about the experience that is attracting new consumers today. And by the way, if you go back to the Midwest, the old style bars that are back there, the ones I would go to when I was 18, and that had a bunch of beers by town. Those are all going out of business. Like 1,000 a week. It's the last number I heard. But the bars that are doing quite well. So here is Kaiser Tiger. These are all chains I'm going to go through. Kaiser Tiger. These are curling lanes. This is in Minneapolis, and so when the winter stops, then you end up having a beer garden instead. Darts, for the Flight Club, social darts. It's you're bringing it over from the UK, drinking in darts. These are all activity-based. Ping pong. It's called a chain called Ace Bounce. Shuffleboard, Royal Palms. This one's in Chicago. They're in Florida. They're all over the place. This one I think is cool. Bad Axe. Bad Axe. I got to go to one of these places. Drinking and axe throwing. I actually would like to see drinking and gun shooting. Let's really get crazy. But these are the kind of experiences that people are going for right now. And so the spirits industry has got to figure it out. They're kicking our, can I say ass? Okay. It's another technical term. But they're doing all these things. This one on the bottom right-hand corner, this is up in Seattle when I was up there for New Year's. And this place, they have these tables set up. This is miniature golf, but these tables are set up like here, and so that you can. I'll just do this because I'm thirsty. Thank you. They walk up, they put their glass down, and then they have a miniature golf thing, but you push it like kind of a cue stick with pool. It's got this little blade on it, and you push it, you hit it that way instead of this way. But everything is drink height, so it's socializing and miniature golf at the same time. So this is what we're up against: concerts, tiki lounges, video lounges. And what's our answer to that? What's our mixologist? It's a sommelier. Good morning or good evening. Welcome to fill in blank. This was harvested at 26.3 bricks. It was long days and cool nights. pH of blah, 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 blah. That was, when I was younger, my idea of fun was to go out and eat good food, which, back in the 70s and the 60s, we really didn't have good food. Iceberg lettuce was the only kind of lettuce. It just came in one flavor. And so going to a nice restaurant that had something unique like red lettuce was kind of a big deal. And being spoiled by a guy that, showed you this bottle, that was kind of a big deal. That was fun. Today, that's not so much fun. And when you look at tasting rooms, this is what you see. That's not fun, right? There's nothing to that. And if you can see, I don't think there's anybody in that bar under 40. And when you go around and you look at the tasting rooms in Sonoma and Napa County, it's largely the way they look. So this is the kind of, I bring this up as a point so that we understand the threat that we're under and the fact that we're missing the marketing message for the new consumer. And the issue here isn't to change what we're doing, it's to add to what we're doing. We can't say, stop selling to the boomer. We can't say, we're going to just change what we're doing, and we're not going to have the lifestyles of the rich and famous kind of an approach that maybe some of our consumers want. We're going to have to do two things. And by the way, it's going to get more complex than that, because the youngest generation, for the first time, will be over 50% non-white. So now we have to deal with, even greater segmentation. So these are the factors that are coming up and the ones that we're going to have to deal with. So here is one of the things I wanted to show you. So this is one secret of growth, is that we have to market to both consumer bases. And here's an example. So this, if you look, I'll just run them all out. So the red one at the bottom, that red line at the bottom, that's luxury writing instruments. So guys here that are my age, when I first got into banking, I got a Mont Blanc pen, and it was really, I think it was $60, and that really was $60 back then. And you put it in this ink reserve, and you pulled out the ink, and filled up the reserve, and you put it in your pocket, and then it all spilled all over your shirt. But it was really cool. It was luxury, right? Well, you can see the growth rate of luxury writing utensils, right? Because I don't use them. Young consumers don't use them either. What's another interesting one? Luxury timepieces. That's that purple one. This purple one right here. So luxury timepieces. You got to be a dinosaur to have a luxury timepiece. You guys are young. Do you have? No. What? You're old school. Analog. Analog. Attaboy. Most of the time, what you find on younger consumers, they have Apple Watches or Fitbit or something like that. But you don't even need a watch, right? Because it's the time, anyways, is on your phone. So, not surprisingly, you don't see much growth except, the renegades like you that actually, like the analog watches. So there's a little bit of growth in luxury, not very much. But look at that blue one. You know what that blue one is? That is luxury beauty care. Now think about that. Why is that going up like that? It's because old people want to have fewer wrinkles, and they want to be younger, and younger people want to be beautiful. And if you look at the commercials on television or other places, what you find is that that product is sold entirely different. You can't sell, you'll have less wrinkles to a 30-year-old. That doesn't make sense, right? And so this is what we have to think about. We have to think how we are going to sell to two different categories. It's quite a quandary, but I believe we can do it. Second secret, I ran this in October of this last year. I asked the question, how many wineries actually have a person assigned to analyze consumer data? And it turns out 2/3 don't even look at the data. 7%, 8% have a full-time person, and 25% have a part-time employee to go through and look at that data. And unless we start to do a better job with our data analytics, we're going to be spending a lot of money and wasting a lot of time. Today we have Customer Vineyard and Emmetry, who are two new entrants to the market, who are able to use big data to help you start to think through the next steps of how do we sell direct. And as an example, one of the things that is like critical if you have a winery today, you got to collect names. People that taste your wine, the greatest obstacle to purchase is trial. So you think of yourself, you go down a wine list and you're looking, which wines to buy. I guarantee you, every single person in this room, you're looking for something you recognize, you've had experience with. And if there's something that, maybe you know the region, you don't know the bottle, or you don't know the producer, but you know the region, and it's maybe under 35 bucks, okay, I'm gonna take a risk on that. If it's $75, you go, nah, that's not the way I'm gonna go. So trial is the greatest obstacle to actually having a sale. And too often, we let people, especially in the non-by-appointment tasting room, but the ones that are just open, they walk in, they try, and they leave. They never sign up. You don't know who they are. You don't have their email address. They don't have their phone number. You'll never be able to market to them. If you actually collected that information, you'd be able to use that Ametree or Customer Vineyards big data and append that information. So now you can see that, oh, these people actually are here with, their $60,000 kind of family income. They live in, this area with low demographics for what we would really think. Or you might find, okay, well, these guys live in Belmont. They're a wine aficionado, or a wine spectator, cigar aficionado. It looks like they have a wine cellar. You can tell with big data they're in 3 separate wine clubs, and none of them are yours. And so you know that those are the guys you got to market to. So we have a lot of those kind of things that we can do. So coming down the home stretch here, we're going to have to connect, to get this next round of growth, we're going to have to connect with both generations. And the worst thing we can do is to just linger and wait for the boomers to stop buying. We can't become your parents' generation. We can't become your parents' tasting room. Quick sidebar on that. How am I doing time now?
You're fine.
Okay. Quick sidebar then. I don't normally like to give a personal reflection of things for backup of opinions, because it's too often, people say, well, sales are down because of cannabis. You just guess, right? But this one was useful. Okay, so my stepdaughter went to Cal, and her mother and I started dating in 2011. And I would go and visit her. I'd have my little wine cellar over at her house. And I said, she has 3 girls, and I said, you guys can, whenever you want, you can pick a bottle out. I didn't leave any of the expensive stuff, but we had decent stuff. And I'd come there on the weekend, I'd cook for the family, and it was a ball. So she had an idea about wine. Jackie moved in with me several years ago into Napa and sold her house, and her oldest daughter went to medical school. Before she went to medical school, she got a year's work at Saintsbury doing harvest. Just loved it. I was grateful that she said, actually, that she said, if you and Mom would have met before, I probably would be a winemaker now. But she went to medical school instead, so I'm glad she took that path. But she came back in November. She was over in medical school in Australia. So she comes back and she wants to take her girlfriend's wine tasting. And she's 28. So I said, well, honey, do you want me to set you up on tours and tastings? No, that's okay. And I didn't really, press it, but I'm thinking, well, why doesn't she want, because I can get her free tastings. And I don't know if you'd ever think of the reason why. The reason why she didn't want to go is because she knew where I was going to send her. Even though it was free, she didn't want to go. She was going to go to some of the nicest, areas in Napa. Not for her generation. So she ended up finding it on her own. She went out. Her friends came back. They were a little looped. They had a ball. They Ubered in, Ubered back. They found a place in Carneros. I don't even remember the name of it. So, honey, why did you go there? Well, I went on Instagram. And I looked at pictures. And then I looked at ratings. And I said, well, what about this place stood out? They had a picnic table outside and cornhole. Interesting. Cornhole, yeah. And so what they were looking for was an opportunity to just linger. They wanted to just go there and have a glass of wine and linger. That was the experience. That was go back to that bar, those bar scenes. That was the activity. The cornhole is basically bocce of today, if you want to think about it that way. And so they go play a little bit. And here's the other thing. She said, we really don't know wine. And we didn't feel comfortable walking into that tasting room because everybody that's in that tasting room's got gray hair. They all know more about wine than we know about. And here's a woman that worked in a harvest for a year and got 5 years of tasting really good wines under her belt. But they didn't want to walk in there because they didn't want to feel dumb, right? And I kind of get that. You want to go in where your tribe is, and you look at this thing, and it's all older people. I don't want to go hang out with a bunch of old people. Not that I am one, but I don't want to do that. So this is part of the thing that we're going to have to get through. She told me at that point, she said, Robbie, at some point, Napa is going to have to figure it out that my generation wants to linger. That's totally counter to everything I've ever believed. Because in my thinking, it's always been like restaurants and table turns. People come in, you serve them, you try to get them out as quick as you can so you can put somebody else in that spot. Tasting bars used to be that way. They walk in, you go through your dinner, you're out. Because it was really about it wasn't about experience, it was about trial. But then it became trial and experience. But originally it was just about trial. So now we have this other thing where the younger consumer wants to linger. And we're going to have to accommodate that because that's what that consumer wants. Or we're going to be like beer. We're not going to give the consumer what they want, and they're not going to buy. Another idea is we have this thing that is, I think, incredibly odd when you think about it. 61% of the average winery's sales come from somebody that walks into the winery. So, as a benchmark, I'm not saying 61% of wine is sold direct, actually 10% of wine is sold direct today. But 61 for an average winery, the small wineries, they're either going through the tasting room or the wine club, right? So how do they get in the wine club? They walk into the tasting room. They get signed up, and now you get the 4 years of lifetime value of that customer, 3 years, something like that. And that's part of that 61%. So the majority of now a winery's revenue ends up coming from people that have to go to the winery. Now, think about how much sense that makes in an era where we've gone from into this Amazon thing where you're online. Bookstores are going out of business, not going to the retail place. We're actually making people come to the factory. It's like saying, I want to have a Ford. We got to go to Detroit. Now, how much sense does that really make? We actually, in an analog, in a digital era, we went back in the early 2000s into an analog thing, and there's some really good reasons for that. But we're going to have to overinvest now in digital and big data in order to come up with that. Part of the thing is, I talk about boots in the streets. If you're doing good data analytics, you can look at your list of people, and you can say, oh, okay, I got this big group in Salt Lake. It's big Salt Lake. And if I have a big group of people in Salt Lake, then maybe what I want to do is I want to go to the concierge that is at the Hilton or whatever nice hotel is in Salt Lake. And more than likely that person is dying to work with a winery. And they would like to represent you in that market. And so, that person can actually own a market. You can start to pay people on commission. If they make a movement in that market, they can earn a little bit of money on the side. And this is, they call it side hustle economy. But that's one of the things that we can do. We don't have to physically go there all the time. That's one of the things that we do. We just get like into these on rails. Well, I can't go. It's just not going to work for me to cover 30 different markets as a human. No, just find 30 different people or 15 different people to manage in a part-time basis. Just one idea. Internet sales right now are 3%. The luxury business is at 17%. So for years, the luxury industry has said, well, we can't sell digitally. We can't sell online. Why is that? Well, because they've got to come in and they've got to experience, our shops. They have to see, they have to feel, they have to smell the wool. They've got to touch the fabric. They've got to, have glass of sparkling put in their hands, and they got to be wooed by the sales associate. 17% now is sold. Why is that? It's because young consumers buy on their phones. That's the way they want to buy. They don't want to be wooed. They go and they do their searches. And I actually bought a pair of Allbirds. You know that one? You guys know that? Allbird shoes? Oh, you're not with it. You guys are definitely analog, yeah. I love you guys. So yeah, my daughter texted me and she goes, you gotta buy these Allbird shoes. I bought shoes online. Who would ever thought you could buy shoes online? But apparently they're cool too, so maybe I'll be cool. I mean, not, but 3% versus 17%, we have a lot of movement to do in that. Big data, we have talked enough about it. We got to do it, makes it more efficient. We've got to find a model now that doesn't start, well, once the person walks in the tasting room, then. That can't be the model anymore. We can't say when a person comes in. As a matter of fact, I'm not saying we give up tasting room, we give up club. I'm saying that you use big data to figure out how to hard target people to get into your tasting room. And then we have to figure out how to serve them nationally without using three-tier. A lot of things are coming up and being available, but if we don't make the investment, we don't make the move, we're going to be caught really behind. Last one, I think this is the last one. This is something I've been talking about for a few years, and it's confusing to wineries because it sounds like a second label, and it's not. I'm talking about an on-ramp. So I came up with this idea. I said, if in Napa, your lowest price red at best is $45. It's probably more like $65. And that young consumer is you're not going to be relevant at all to that young consumer, with that kind of a price. So you've got to find a way to meet the consumer where they are, somehow. How do you do that? Well, I don't think we can take a luxury good and just lower the price. That doesn't make sense. But we also can't wait for the consumer to go find something else besides us. We have to find a way to be relevant. So I came up with this idea and talked to a bunch of wineries. One of my wineries actually took me up on it. And the idea was to make about 3,000 cases of A wine and to experiment. And the idea was you make this wine, but you make it in Lodi. You can't afford to make it in Napa. You can't use Napa grapes. It just don't work. So they made this wine in Lodi. They bought grapes from Lodi. They bought them from Lake County and Mendocino County. And they sold it for $25. Their lowest price red wine was $45. Big gap, right? So, because we don't want to cannibalize. And now the important thing is how we market it. So the idea was now to only sell this in one market using one distributor. And they chose Minneapolis, where they had a good relationship. And so they had 3,000 cases of this wine made, and it was a pittance, relative to the kind of costs that we're used to seeing in the North Coast. It was actually really, really cheap to make this wine. And they priced it for $25. Here's the other thing that they did. That's why I say it's an on-ramp, is that it had the winery's name up here. It's the exact same label that's on the $65, $75, $125, exact same label. But it said winery name, and then it said on-ramp. And on the back of the label, what it says is, dear young consumer, we're making this wine for you. We realize that we sell a luxury good. It's expensive, and maybe you can't try it, but we made this wine specifically for you so that you could see the kinds of wine we make. And by the way, I hope you enjoy it, but when you get to the point of maybe coming and visiting us, inside that cork, you bring that with you, and we will treat you to free tastings with your entire party. So the end result was, one other thing, the critical thing, you can't sell it in a tasting room, right? Because that does cannibalize it, so that's not the idea. The idea is marketing. You're trying to do the same thing General Mills and Procter & Gamble used to do, was putting Crest in your mailbox. You're trying to get, you're trying to be relevant to this new consumer. And what ended up happening was they got the information back from retailers. The retailers said, yeah, the older consumers that were used to the brand went down market to try it, and they didn't like it. Exactly what you want. They didn't like it. They went back to the other one they liked. The younger consumer came up market, tried the wine. They said, this is awesome. The next thing that happened is the region ran out. They sold through all 3,000 cases in a heartbeat. And everybody was retail. They were thrilled to get it, by the way. And the other thing it did is, I hadn't thought this one through, but it actually spurred sales of the higher end wine because the retailers were talking about it. And so the older consumers actually found these wines. So you engaged with the young consumer and you still sold to the older consumer. And they all wanted more. They ran out in 9 months. And I'm talking to my client and they said, oh, we're going to have to make more. And I said, no, that's not the idea. You're not making any money on this. This is just pure marketing. You're making zero profit. So don't double down and make zero profit on twice as many. This is just marketing. And so I said, you can give that distributor half of what they got, and they can think harder about how they want to ration it out. You do have to get it to the right retailer because otherwise they'll raise price. But you're still trying to have scarcity be part of the discussion. So, there's another idea, but these are all of the problems and things that we have to come up with. We got to find solutions because if we don't, go back to those first slides. Volume is off for the first time since '83. All the writing is on the wall. The young consumer is not engaging. We've got to engage that young consumer. If we don't find solutions to these problems, we're going to have more problems to deal with. Doom and gloom McMillan. Right? So, I've been rambling. Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much. And because this is being video and audio recorded, we're going to have those questions spoken into the microphone so the people can hear it on the website when it gets released. Hold on a second, I'll bring the microphone to you.
Hi, is this working? So, as a premium winery, I look at a lot of this data and have a lot of thoughts about the millennials and with regard to them not having the money to buy my product, which is basically enforced by kind of what you're saying today. I mean, the numbers, the ages at which people are starting to buy homes and so forth going up, and the debt that they're saddled with, and so forth, they're just not in a position to buy my product probably for the next 5 years. But I also think about so much of this data and so many of the sales numbers are for products that are so far below where we are price-wise that it almost seems to support what you're saying also with regard to beer and the quality of the product not being there and consumers looking maybe spend more and buy a better quality product. So I guess my question is kind of twofold. I mean, do you think that this is kind of part of the natural evolution of people drinking wine and that their taste mature as their resources hopefully grow, and we're seeing at a later point in time, which is what's actually causing this to happen. I mean, and then second, I know you're getting a lot of other data from other places besides Nielsen, which is obviously not where we're selling our wine, and I think a lot of people here in Sonoma County aren't selling wine necessarily in these places where these things are showing up. So. I guess I still kind of look at this thinking, these people are coming, but they're maybe 5 years off, and at that point, you have to die off on the other end of the scale too,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I think your question is, should we wait?
Well, it's not even so much that we should wait, it's that how much time and money are you going to spend to get a consumer that isn't able to buy a product now?
So the first thing I say, as Dan will tell you, I say quite often, is hope is not strategy. And so if I'm pressed with these facts, I want to do what I can control. And your thinking may be right. We might be able to wait it out. And it's possible that it's just nothing but a delay. It's that indulgence gap. And maybe that's all of it is. I don't think so, though. And the reason I don't think so is because the thing that drove the growth rate in wine for the last 27 years, and which is why the slides look like they do with older people liking wine. It's not just the fact that we had a lot of money. It's also it was the price of wine back then. It was the quality of beer, and it was the quality of spirits. and it was the health factors. All of those things are in a different spot now. And the beverage consumer, alcohol consumer now is drinking across categories. And the young consumer is drinking less. And even the younger consumer after that is drinking less than millennial. So we have issues on our hands. The Wine Institute is going to have to take care of the health messaging component, or some other institute like that, because as permit holder, you can't talk about the health quality of your product. It's illegal. You'll have your permit revoked. So we have to have the Wine Institute. I've been trying to press them since December to try to put an FTE back in place. We had one in the 80s. And so when a reporter would, get some wild claims about, the next iteration of anti-health, they would at least go to the Wine Institute and get somebody to talk to that had the offsetting science. Because science is, as somebody once said, show me the results, I'll show you who paid for it, right? And so it's important to have a balanced view, to have somebody that's there representing the other side, and we don't have that right now. So part of that ends up being that. But the other stuff we're going to have to control it. And you're right from the standpoint that you don't want to discount your brand, but there's a huge threat in just waiting because you're not the only game. It's not just beer and spirits, it's also foreign wine. And right now the young consumer's drinking Italian Pinot Grigio, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and what am I missing? Provence Rosé. So those are all interesting wines, well made, inexpensive. And that's what we're teaching our young consumers to drink. We're not engaging. It may be that we can't sell to them for a while, but what you can do is collect names, right? So if there's a way that I can become relevant, if I could get young people to come to my bar, if I could get them to try my wine and collect their names, that's worth it to me. That's an investment that I want to make. If I could figure out how to not charge them a tasting fee, you say, oh, wait a second, I can't, I have to charge the same for everybody. No, you don't. You get in an airplane, the person next to you didn't have that same price. You can find ways to get that young consumer to your, I want that young consumer here, and they're going to put a piece of paper down on the counter. The person posting will say, welcome, we're glad to have you. Older person puts it, they paid $60 or whatever, welcome, we're glad they're going to treat it the same way. But the purpose of getting that younger consumer is to get engagement. You want to be relevant, you want them to remember that brand and their name. You want when they look at a wine list, they're out having a good time, they see that. And they say, oh, I was there, I remember that place, that was really cool, I'm going to splurge. That's how they edge their way into your brand. And if we do nothing, I'm afraid we'll be irrelevant.
Other questions for Rob?
So you have me thinking with one thing, maybe we can't really, those consumers are not going to come to our door, but when they do come, they're going to want those experiences that we don't have already set up for them.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's the lesson for us small wineries is to start
Cornwall.
getting ready for them.
That's actually, I didn't put the slide up, but that's one of my jokes. I'm presenting at Cal Poly, and I'm in March, middle March, and I'm setting it up so that they're having a cornhole competition with the faculty and then a couple of the viticulture and enology classes. And I have a slide that I didn't present, but that's the solution is cornhole. It's actually it's a placeholder for a lot of other discussions, but we need to have outdoor and which are the least expensive to fix, right? And I mean cornhole. How much does a cornhole game cost? But we can figure this out, and we can also think about how we address the young consumer and give them the space that they want, but make sure we're still giving them the attention that they want, which is less, by the way. That's an okay thing. And then the other thing I think we can do with the young consumer is we can ask them. We don't do a very good job of consumer trials. Gallo, big wine companies, they do it. But you can run consumer trials with young people. They'd be more than happy to participate and give you some really good, valid information. You may not like the information, you may disagree with it, you may not use it, but it's not very hard to do.
Ron, what's your thought on tasting rooms. I've been reading a lot of reports about how tasting rooms don't pencil out for small wineries, and the trend is that people are not going to tasting rooms. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think tasting rooms are critical because, when tasting rooms started, there was no fee. Tasting rooms started because the wineries are trying to drive. People would come out to Napa, Sonoma, they'd taste wines, they'd go back to Minnesota and they'd buy it from Safeway or whatever back there. But it was about trial. At a point, we became, a party, and we started saying, well, let's just raise our prices. And then, prices have just kind of kept going up, and it got out of control. We really didn't put a lot of thought into how we were raising tasting room. So I would say that today the issue of tasting room ends up being a lot about execution. Location is an issue. I'll give you an example. Downtown tasting rooms, it's a big discussion over here. I looked at the data from downtown tasting rooms, and it's not very good. The performance of downtown tasting rooms is just not that great. Originally the idea was, well, let's see if we can put a tasting room, downtown, then at least we'll be near where neighbors are. Now, there are reasons you got to have it anyway. So if you are, out at the end of the Russian River, you kind of got to have a place somewhere to capture it. That's just kind of a natural. If you're in Washington, in Walla Walla, you're on the east side. There's no population, so you may have to find a different way to do it too. But it really gets down to execution, how we're using tasting rooms. I think if you're looking at a downtown tasting room as an example, I would, instead of thinking that I'm going to treat, and this is the way they started, I don't think they still are this way, but largely what people said was, $35 tasting fee at the winery, it's $35 tasting fee at the downtown tasting room. It's a different experience. It's a different consumer, by the way, too. So the tasting fee can't be the same. Who wants to pay you think about it, it's like walking into a nightclub and having to pay a $35 cover. That's a lot. So, we've got to kind of rethink that. And in my view, that ends up being probably an okay place to have that young consumer. You put on different music. You put the current hip-hop, R&B, whatever they want to listen to. That's what you play. You have tattooed people behind the bars with beards, and let their people, let their tribe be there, and you collect names. And if you look at a tasting room from that standpoint, then I think there's reason to do it. But most of the time, it really gets down to just execution. Are you using metrics? How's the training? And actually, how are you getting people to, you just can't put balloons out on your mailbox at the end of the road now, right? It's got to be, you got to use digital marketing and hard targeting. There's digital ad agencies that are out there that can help you with that kind of stuff. But it's really execution.
Other questions? Yes.
Are we having fun? Because I'm all about fun.
I was wondering how you would get the millennial to have a taste for and appreciate a $40 bottle of wine, and occasionally go out and buy it just because they know it's going to be better. A lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter. I want to drink a bottle a week and I can only afford $20. Well, maybe it'd be better if they waited 2 weeks because they know that the $40 bottle would be much better. How do you get their appreciation of wine to come up to that level?
Well, I think a lot of them do have an appreciation for wine. My stepdaughters know their way around my cellar, but they don't really have money to buy. But I really do think it gets down to, your name has to be, front of mind, because they'll take a risk or they'll buy a $45 if they want to have a group together, and they'll savor, and at the right event, they're going to savor and relax and enjoy that, and talk about, the time that they visited that winery. that's an experience. It's that Facebook experience, the Instagram moment, you know, that's, everybody lives their life today in a very public way, so that, you know, if you only captured the digital images from Instagram, everybody would have just a beautiful life, right? I mean, that's you don't show that, you know, the time that your zipper was open when you're giving a speech. You know, we have to be relevant. Was where it starts. We've got to get that name out there, and then if the name's in their mind, then they're going to take that risk. They're going to buy your wine. But we got to find that on-ramp. We got to find that beginning point. It's not easy. Oh, and by the way, I always get this question, so I'm going to say it. I've had this every single time. People say, "Well, can you give me an example of somebody that's doing it right?" Right? We all want to see who's doing it right, and then we can copy. And my answer is nobody, sadly. So there are people that are doing some right things. And I have one of my customers that they don't have any vineyards. They're all leased. They're custom crush. They sell about 8,000 cases in Sonoma, and they have they don't have a winery. They have a tasting room that's, you know, in a downtown location, and they're killing it. They're just killing it because they think consistently about the ROI. When they're out on the road, they go out on the road. They take the experience on the road, and they visit different regions, and they won't do an event unless they have at least 40 people. Why 40 people? Because 40 people is 20 couples, and they know out of that 20 couples, if they're the right 20 couples, they're going to be able to sell to 3 of them, and the return from selling to 3 of them, getting in the wine club makes sense. So that's one example. Another example is Scribe. You know, they have an outdoor thing, a lot of Instagram moments, and you know, they seem to be doing quite well. It's not a customer, but they look like they're doing a really good job. I know Ashes and Diamonds over in Napa. It's Kashi Lady, that is a customer of mine, and Kashi told me a few months ago that they have about 40% of their club is millennial. It's really surprising. It's 17% on the average data, right? So they're doing something that's right. They're attracting that young consumer. So the big data, it's starting to you know, Emmetry, Customer Vineyard, both of them are active and trying to help the industry grow. I don't see ways to copy. I see opportunities to improve, and we can all, I think, work together to find those. You had a follow-up question.
Well, it's not really, it's, I've heard a story about the difference, how the perception and how the value, what people value in these age groups. And the boomer shows up at the party with a $60 bottle and is trying to impress his friends because it's so good and it's rare and all this. Whereas the millennial shows up, he found a bottle that was $15, it's really good. I don't know who knows why, but that impresses his friends.
Yeah.
Only $15.
Yeah.
So it's a different way of looking at things.
You,
Do you find some validity to that?
Yeah, actually, it's you're referencing a slide that I put in about 8 years ago, which is, you know, I read a poster session where the guy was saying, oh, you know, the beginning of it was actually told in that class, you know, Parker 97, you know, so, you know, $150, and the woman with him says, oh, what a dream, you know, and then that poster session, you know, $25, you know, oh, what a dream, you know. So, and then Tony Correa, one of my friends, actually copied that slide. So that one's been around the speaking circuit now quite often. And yeah, I think that is something. The young generation, they don't like displays of wealth. You know, it's that's not the way they think. You know, that was my generation. And you know, we were always trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're trying to be more egalitarian and more socially conscious and share wealth and not those kind of concepts. So bragging for them, you know, doesn't really work. And yeah, in the same token, they like luxury, but they do it different. You know, when you look at what kind of things they do with luxury, they'll go out and they'll, you know, buy like a purse or something that they really like, and then they'll shop at Goodwill. And you know, buy an old thing and then repurpose it. You see that same sort of thing in architecture. When you look around new architecture, it's repurposed woods. You know, it's not like my generation, marble and gold leaf. Right? It's very different. So now it's more open, more airy, more outside. Those are the kind of things that the younger consumer, I think, values more.
This is the last question, and then we'll break for lunch and wine, and Rob will be here through the lunch hour to talk to you further and ask further questions.
So in one of the slides you had up there, you showed one of the other states in terms of the visits to their tasting rooms versus the tasting rooms in our area where they're all on the downslope. How much do you attribute what we're seeing in terms of reduced traffic to people being able to find a similar experience in their own state and in their own neighborhood? I'd love to see what Texas looks like, because I know that one of our wine club members came out and learned a lot from us, and then went and started his own winery, and tells me about how busy he is and how many wine club members he has already.
Yeah, and price, plays a big
And the
role.
price.
Yeah, there are, the regions are doing well because they're not your parents' tasting room, they're not your parents' wines. So that's a natural advantage. They're lower priced. If you go up right now I'm going to go up in April to Passport Weekend in El Dorado County. And I go around and I'll taste through 30 wineries up there. And I can find good wines for $15. I'll come home with 8 cases, which will last me about a month with my alcohol problem. But so they're less expensive and the value is there. But the other reasons those areas like Virginia they're going up is some different models. They like weddings. A lot of them have restaurants attached. So when you see visitation, you also have to consider the fact they're doing it a little bit different than the way we do it. So that's another part. Money is a big part of it, I think.
So a big round of applause for Rob McMillan. Thank you.